Well, it's 8 o'clock, everyone. Welcome. We're here for Attracting Wildlife in the City with Living Your Eco Design and Wise Hands. I'm Amanda, and I have a small business located in Pinellas County, Florida, Living Your Eco Design and its partner, Pinellas Community Compost. I grew up on a working farm in northern Michigan. I've been gardening my whole life, and moved to Florida for college and was a teacher for a while, an elementary school teacher. And I worked in our school garden. And since becoming a parent, I decided to move into gardening and landscaping to help people make better choices for their yards.
Ready for us to say hello, Amanda?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll go first. I guess I'm Mallory Foster, and Steph and I started Wise Hands about a year ago, thanks to a lead from Amanda, actually, and then went full time into it this spring, so a couple of months ago. I come from a background, like Amanda had a different career before this. My background's in nutrition and permaculture design, as well as gardener, and kind of bringing it all together now with native plants and veggie gardening and fruit trees. So kind of bringing a bunch of things together to do what we do now. I'll turn it over to Stephen.
That's a great introduction, Mallory. And thank you, Amanda, for putting this on. And yeah, Amanda did help us get our first consistent client, so that was really cool. And yeah, definitely thank you for that. So my name's Stephen. My background is at Wilcox Nursery and Landscape, which if you're in the Pinellas County or Tampa Bay area, you might have heard of. So that's where I learned about native plants. I was a nursery production manager there for about 4 years. Yeah, and that was a great experience. And then started doing side work for a while, and always wanted to start my own business. And Mallory hopped on and left her job at the University of Florida, so that was awesome. And we've been doing this full time since now about March, and Mallory's been full time with it since April. Native plants, all the things we're going to talk about today, and then Mallory's background with permaculture and edible plants and everything was a really good combination. And there was definitely a need for the maintenance side of things. So that was kind of the impetus to start the whole business as well in the native plant world. So yeah, happy to be here.
So in a food forest or any forest, there's all of these different systems that are interacting together. There are the systems that are above ground that we're all familiar with. There's the birds, the butterflies, the leaves, and fruit and larger animals. And even though we live in the city, these things are still there. You may have noticed when it was really quiet during the beginning of social distancing, there were so many birds just singing happily. That was wonderful. But I've noticed since everything's picked back up, it's a little bit quieter. Anyway, one of the things that we're hoping to help you all do tonight is to see how we can begin to restore our damaged and really overpopulated with people kind of ecosystem. How can we restore that and bring back that wildlife, bring back that diversity, and not just so that you can enjoy the butterflies and the birds and the bees when you're sitting in your backyard, but really so that we can have a healthy and thriving ecosystem. It's really easy to forget that humans are animals. We're part of nature, and when we are a part of nature, we need to be involved in nature. We're a part of this thriving, living web, even though we're not in this image here, in this artwork. And one thing I'd like to point out while we're here is notice what's happening below the surface. There is just as much activity below the surface as there is above. In fact, there's even more activity below the surface. And we're going to talk about how you can help to restore that below the ground ecosystem as well tonight. So here are a few of our local creature helpers, I'm calling them. We have all of these animals living in our urban spaces. I've seen them all, except for that particular type of praying mantis there. I've seen them all in my backyard. And they all have a job to do. They all eat different foods. And if we allow them to do their job, they will really be our partners in helping our yard, our communities, our ecosystems that we're all a part of. They'll really help to make that balanced. What's happened over the years between development and construction and manicuring yards and lawns and redoing landscapes and applying chemicals, we've really damaged our ecosystem. And you might think, well, I just sprayed the lawn and all the other stuff should be fine, but it's all interconnected. So when we poison one part, or when we damage one part, it trickles down into those other parts of the food web and the ecosystem. And if you look here at these animals, which is just a very small sampling of what we might find in our backyard, a lot of these animals, like the bird, the spider, the bat, the ladybug, the praying mantis, and the lizard, oh, and the toad, they eat insects. They eat those bugs that you're trying to kill. If we were to allow these animals to have their, to thrive, to have the food that they need, healthy, clean, organic food, just like we all want to eat, then they would be able to do their job a lot better. I was sitting in my yard a few days ago and just kind of watching the clouds pass by. And I noticed there was some activity in one of my vegetable plants. I was like, what's going on? And I'd been having a caterpillar problem. I don't know if you all vegetable garden, but caterpillars eat cucumber plants. They love them, and it's a huge problem. So I was like, what's going on over there? So I went over there, and there was a bird hopping around eating caterpillars in my cucumber plant. I was so excited. I'm glad I didn't spray neem oil or any of the chemicals on there that I could have sprayed, because that bird then would have gotten a toxic lunch. And well, maybe not neem oil so much, but some of the other stuff that people commonly use on their vegetable plants or their landscape plants would have made that caterpillar not a very healthy meal for the bird. So if we just allow these things to be able to do their job, then we'll all be able to see more birds, see more butterflies, and help restore that natural balance. So here we have some birds. One bird is a cardinal feeding her babies, and the other bird is an owl. Cardinals eat a variety of food, as most birds do. They eat different foods throughout their life cycle. And a big part of what they need to feed their babies is caterpillars. They need that soft food so they can smush it down their babies, down into their babies' mouths. But as they get older, they need seeds, and they need berries, and they need different foods to eat. And a lot of you might have bird feeders. And what are you putting in those bird feeders? Seeds. And you're buying them and you're taking them home in plastic bags. That's great, because you want to see the birds. But at the same time, you're attracting birds, and many people are actually then spraying their natural food with chemicals. So you're attracting the birds, or you're attracting the butterflies with your butterfly garden and your flowers, but you're spraying them. And that's really damaging to the ecosystem. And that little owl there, he is a carnivore. He eats what we definitely don't want: rats and mice in particular, and other small animals. So when we put poisons out for the rodents, we're actually, well, we're maybe getting rid of the rodents, but we're hurting our larger predator animals who will naturally be able to keep that ecosystem in balance by just hunting. I have a family of these little owls in my yard, and I really like to watch them sit on the fence at night or hop around in the trees. It's really a treat to be able to see them. And that one picture with the red circle, I want to point that out. This is a plant that I'm sure some of you have this awful opinion about, the Spanish needle Bidens alba. It's one of my favorite and absolute least favorite plants at the same time. This plant is, according to many people, the third most important source for nectar for bees in the wintertime. And then if you see the part that I circled, those are seeds, and you're all familiar with those on your shoes or your pant legs, I'm sure. But those are also a big, huge food source for birds. I was reading an article recently, and they said that those seeds were a favorite of the painted bunting. So I have never seen a painted bunting here. I think their range is a little bit further north. But they're, if you're not familiar with them, they're a rainbow-colored bird. And they love those. And then also grass seeds. If you want to let your grass get just a little bit long so those long stalks come up, or if you have any native grasses in your landscape, birds eat those seeds. Those are the seeds that they naturally eat in nature. There's a number of really beautiful landscape plants that you can have in your yard too, just like that native beautyberry there with the clusters of purple flowers. The birds go crazy for that. And just providing the natural food sources in your yard will really help your natural ecosystem to thrive. So just something to keep in mind: you want to reduce your chemical use, plant foods for your birds, and you want to protect your predator species because they are going to help restore that balance. Today we're mostly talking about birds and butterflies, but I want to point out that if you have thriving populations of birds and butterflies, you're also going to have thriving populations of lizards and amphibians and bees and all sorts of different animals in your yard that will help to eat those pest bugs, the mosquitoes, the aphids on your plants, anything that you might want to look to spray. There's usually a natural predator for most things, and if we just let nature take its course and provide it the opportunity, there's a much greater chance that it will be able to take care of itself with less or with minimal help. And I did want to point out while we're here that there are several species of native bees in Florida, and the majority of them are actually ground dwellers, meaning they burrow into the ground, they dig holes, and they live in those. So when we put chemicals on our grass, we're killing that native bee population. So yes, we do have honeybees, but honeybees are actually considered to be livestock because that's an animal that you purchase and take care of. So we really want to help our native bees to be as productive and thrive as much as possible. Another thing that you can do besides providing food is you can provide shelter, spaces for those animals to hide. One thing that you can do is make a brush pile. And that top image there, that's just a little tiny brush pile that I've made in my yard with some branches that have fallen off my oak tree. I Googled make a brush pile for an animal kind of shelter sanctuary, and a lot of them are really big. And I personally didn't really want a really big brush pile in my yard. I live in the city. I didn't want to do that. But even this small brush pile will make an impact. There are usually toads around in this area, and different animals that I've seen just hopping around. They're able to hide in there. They're able to seek shelter if there's an animal up overhead that might want to catch them. And it just provides a little bit more cover. Another thing that you can do is plant plants that are multiple heights together. When you look at a forest, you don't see a hedge. You don't see just one simple manicured hedge. You don't see just a stand of trees that are all the same kind. You see different types of plants intermingled at different levels. And what this does is it allows your birds and your animals to have different little branches and different levels to hop between so that they feel safer. They can take cover easily. And different animals like different levels and different areas to nest in, to sit in, to hide in. And the more spaces that you can provide, the more diversity you'll get in your yard. Another thing that you could do is planting in clusters. It's going to look better. It's going to give you that lush botanical gardens look that we all crave. And it's going to give those animals some cover. And there's nothing wrong with planting a hedge. I have a hedge in my yard, but you need more than just a simple single layer hedge. One thing that I like to do in my yard is I like to have a small wild area where I can let those plants grow, the grass grow a little bit longer, and I can let the Spanish needle grow a little bit. So that I can attract those animals with the wild native, I guess, weeds. A lot of them are considered weeds, but most weeds are actually native plants. And if you let them flower, did anybody here participate in No Mow May? I did. Maybe it was No Mow April too. I don't have a whole lot of grass. But anyway, I was always surprised at how many different little flowers came up when I don't mow, just watching whatever is green and you mow it, you know, those are usually flowering. And then if you are one to provide water, like a bird bath for wildlife, consider putting it near an area where there's cover, also a bird feeder. I was in a class recently and they called the bird feeder and the bird bath out in the middle of cat trap or something like that. Anyway, they meant that the birds were out in the open, they were exposed. So if they went to visit that bird feeder or that bird bath, they would be open to predators. So they would either not visit as often or they wouldn't be safe if they did, whether it was a cat or it was a hawk or something that might want to get them. So offering them the shelter. But at the same time, you want to be careful so that we don't attract unwanted pests. I know that I try everything possible to avoid rats in my vegetable garden and my compost, which is important because we don't want to create a problem. We want to solve problems with our landscape maintenance, not create them. So if you build a brush pile, big or small, keep it away from your compost and away from your garden, at least 3 to 6 feet. That means that you're going to not have a brush pile right up against your garden. They're already going to, the rats or whatever, they're already going to want to seek shelter in whatever you've made. But when you give them a whole bunch of pathways where there's a lot of shelter, they're much more likely to visit. If you have fruit trees, keep that fruit picked up. It's really important to keep your fruit picked up, not only to prevent rodents or pests, but also to keep your yard looking nice. It's important, in my opinion, for those of us who have food forests or are growing a lot of edible plants in our yard to be stewards and set good examples for our neighbors for how growing food in the city can be beautiful and wonderful, because a lot of people actually think that you shouldn't grow food in the city because it will attract pests. So doing everything that we can to eliminate or reduce that is important. And then the healthier you can keep your soil, the fewer insect pests that are going to attract your plants. And then remember, we'll get to this more in detail later, right plant, right place. And then if you're growing annuals, whether it's flowers or vegetables, right season for those annual vegetables. If you're planting during the right time of year, the right weather, those vegetables will have way fewer pest issues. So, how many of you all here compost? If you don't, you should. You can compost your food scraps, your plant-based food scraps, or you can compost your yard waste. Ideally, you would want a mix of the two, browns and greens. I actually have a free composting webinar on Thursday afternoon, a lunch and learn with the City of Dunedin. So if you don't know how to compost and you're interested, go on my website and you can sign up. So anyway, just compost should not smell bad. It shouldn't attract pests if you're doing it right. And it's really, really good for your soil, and it helps improve your soil, and it prevents runoff and erosion of water. It helps water go down into your soil better, and helps your plants to grow deeper, longer, healthier root systems. And then you'll actually reduce your waste. Up to 30% of household waste is compostable. So you can take your trash out less and it won't smell as bad. So I don't know if you remembered from that beginning graphic that we showed you with all that life below the soil. This is just that in a different form. There are actually more different types of microorganisms in the soil in one spoonful of really good, rich, healthy soil than there are humans on the planet. That's a lot. In my soil ecology class that I'm taking, the lesson a couple days ago was that there should be 75,000 species of fungus in a soil sample from a farm. That's a lot, 75,000 species, not just individuals, but different types. So there's also this food system, this nutrient system, and food web below the soil, and all these different animals work together from the ground up to keep your plants happy and healthy. So the better that you can maintain your soil by keeping it covered with mulch or keeping it covered with dense plantings and making sure that you're choosing plants wisely and reducing or even eliminating your chemical use, the healthier your soil can be. And then compost is super good for the planet. It helps with the biodiversity of your yard, with your neighborhood, with your community from the ground up. And just like a house, you want a really firm foundation, a really strong, solid foundation for your plants. Because if you're starting out with poor soil, no matter how many chemicals you put on there, they're never going to be healthy. No matter how much fertilizer you add, your plants are always going to struggle a little bit. And they're going to be dependent upon those chemicals. Compost supports all of those microorganisms, but there are also some larger organisms. And the birds absolutely love them. And so do the lizards and the toads and the frogs. And not only do they eat things from your compost or from your soil, they also eat mosquitoes and June bugs and other flying insects that you might consider to be a pest. And then when you make compost, it's really great for the planet all around. It reduces climate change. It supports our ecosystem. We've had a really big problem with red tide here in the past, and it's linked to nutrient runoff from fertilizers. So the more that we can do, every little bit helps to reduce our landscape dependency on those chemicals. That will help.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Oopsie. Okay, sorry about that. I think we're unmuted now. I was saying thank you, Amanda, and that sounds like so many amazing things that we could do in our yards to attract wildlife. What I'm going to share today is a little bit about butterfly gardening. This is a way that a lot of people like to begin attracting wildlife into their yards, and butterflies are just something that I would say is probably one of the easier things to lure into your yard. You can start really small and build up from there. They bring in not only butterflies, but a diversity of pollinators. That's one of the things that people ask us a bit about at Wise Hands, because we do install a number of butterfly gardens and help maintain them. They'll say, I want to attract the butterflies, but not so much the bees. And it's not really possible to do that because they all love the flowers that are going to bring in butterflies, but you don't really need to worry about the bees because if they're going around to different flowers, they're usually pretty content and they don't want to get in your way. Another benefit of having a butterfly garden is if you are doing fruit trees or vegetables, you're going to have better pollination because you'll have a diversity of pollinators. Like Amanda was saying, those native bees are really good pollinators for your fruits and veggies. You'll have increased biodiversity in your yard. And one way that I like to think about butterflies is a collection. And I'm going to get a little bit more into this in a second, but suffice it to say for now that if you have a diversity of plants, you're going to see a lot of different types of butterflies coming. So we can go to the next one. And this might be a review for a lot of people, but it's so fascinating, and we just wanted to hone in on the life cycle of the butterfly for what we're going to talk about next. We start anywhere on the wheel, but I'll start with number 1, the egg. So butterflies go around your garden and lay eggs on what we will call the host plant. Then, of course, the eggs hatch, turn into little caterpillars. Another question that we frequently get is, oh, should I kill all these caterpillars on my plant? And especially if you're gardening for wildlife, we say, no, don't kill all the caterpillars that you see because that's your baby butterflies many times. Not always, but many times. And so then the larvae will munch and eat. And then when they're ready, they'll turn into a cocoon. They'll be in that cocoon for differing amounts of time depending on the butterfly. And then, of course, metamorphosis occurs and they will emerge a beautiful butterfly. So with that said, let's look at some different plants that you can plant in your garden to, like I said before, select different butterflies. And one of the things that I was excited about in this webinar that Amanda shared was it's one thing to have different animals visit your yard, and it's another level, if you will, to have animals and wildlife take up residence in your yard. And it's really cool to have them take up residence in your yard because then you get to see so many different stages of life. So different butterflies use different plants as the food for their young. And usually what they'll do is they'll lay their eggs on their host plant. So then when their eggs hatch, they're right there ready to eat the flowers or the plants, leaves, stems that particular butterfly uses when it grows up. So in this picture, these are both pictures from our garden at home. On the left side, you'll see a giant swallowtail. Their host plant is a variety of citrus. And this is actually a cultivated lemon tree. And this butterfly is actually laying eggs in this picture. It was a really cool one to capture. And then on the right-hand side, these are not the same butterfly. This is actually the black swallowtail larva. And what they're eating is a fennel flower. And as you can see, they've completely eaten all the flower off, and there's just the stems left, and they're still just munching away. Other great host plants are passion vine for your fritillaries and zebra longwings. And then, of course, milkweeds for the monarch butterflies. That's probably the most well-known one. So if you're considering starting off with a butterfly garden to bring wildlife into your yard, I would even think about, do a little bit of further research on what types of host plants you can plant to attract different types of butterflies. So you can think about what the visual effect will be in your yard when you design your butterfly garden, and you can also think about the functionality of the plants and what is it going to bring into your butterfly garden. And then lastly, another thing that will be an attractor of butterflies is giving them water, especially we recently got some rain finally here in Gulfport, but we had a really long dry spell, I think, throughout probably Pinellas County. So providing a little bit of water will also bring butterflies around. And this is a picture of two different butterfly waters. Bird baths are great, but they tend to be too deep for butterflies and other insects, and they can fall in there and drown, or it's just not their preferred source of water. So something shallow. In the picture on the left, you can see they used what looks like a drainage tray for a plant, and they filled it with some small pebbles and sand and a little bit of water. So the butterfly can safely land on the rocks and sip the water and have a great source. The one on the right looks like it was made, I just found that one online, it was made for butterfly watering. So it's just a small area to put some water in for the butterfly to safely sip for a drink. And I think next I'm going to turn it over to Stefan for more of a broad overview of different types of ecosystems you might have in your yard and how to look at the big picture.
Hey guys, so thank you, and I saw that Virginia Overstreet is here in the group. Say what's up, Virginia. But she was actually at the picture at the beginning. That was Archbold Biological Research Station, which I recommend everybody getting to, and that's where I saw our last part of the Florida Native Plant Society. Definitely got to give a shout out to them. But so being a background as a production manager at a retail nursery, I heard everything, every single question, every kind of person who came in. We sold everything from exotic plants, Florida-friendly exotic plants, to fruit trees, to our bread and butter. What we really concentrated on was native plants. So I heard all the questions. So I guess I just want to try to give a quick overview. I don't know where everybody is as far as their experience from novice to butterfly obsessed. You'll know you're butterfly obsessed when you start calling them my butterflies or my caterpillars. So they're yours. My caterpillars are hungry. I need their plants. Why don't you have them here? They're gonna starve. Help me. So when you get to that point, you're in a good spot. But biggest thing is starting with healthy plants. That's going to start at a good nursery. Of course, I have to say Wilcox Nursery and Landscape is the best. I love everything they've been doing, but Sweet Bay Nursery down in Manatee County is great. And other than that, just look on FAN. The Florida Association of Native Nurseries is going to have a great resource for different native nurseries across the state of Florida. There's so many people doing some wonderful stuff. But generally, you're not going to find the best plants at some of the larger box stores. Those are not going to be the healthiest plants for specifically butterflies. They do other great things, but not specifically plants. Go to a plant store for plants. If you want a grill or some bricks, go to a home improvement store. But there's still good things there. But generally, native plants are going to be at a native plant nursery. Let's see. So observe your landscape. I think that's the simplest thing. Just step back and look at it. Be realistic. If you have and we'll go into that some more, but if you have a dry space, let it be a dry space. If you have a moister, shadier area with a large oak tree, then that's a moist, shady area with a large oak tree. You can't fight what you have there. And that's part of that observing. When I say soil type, you can get really in-depth into soil science. We're not going to do that. There's hundreds of names for different types of soils. To impress your friends, tell them that Florida state soil is called Mica fine sand, which is essentially that. It's a tiny little layer of nothing nutrients on the top and mostly sand, and that's good Florida soil. It's always fun to have somebody come in from somewhere like Iowa or upstate New York or Michigan, like Amanda was saying. They have lots of topsoil, deep, dark, thick soil. Whereas down here in Florida, where geologically younger, we have a very thin layer, but that's great. I say, oh, you got sand, wonderful. We're going to go over, and a simple way to step back and look at your overstory, understory, and your ground layer, ground cover. Overstory being trees. What's big? Maybe you don't have any trees. maybe the biggest thing on your lot is your house. So you can use that. That still has shade. That will cast shade for you. Understory is going to be, let's say, your shrubs and small trees. That's the next level you're going to look at. Hedges, things like that. A hedge can be a very attractive to wildlife if done in the right way. A diverse hedge does not have to be all the same plant. There's no rule out there that says you have to plant all the same thing. And then your ground layer, ground cover. So that ground layer, I would say, would be anything to your small shrubs, small wildflowers. Your ground cover which is something that we've been really enjoying using. Your ground cover layer can be an eventual replacement for mulch. You know, I think it's important to mulch in the beginning, but I would start looking at it more as like a temporary thing. You don't have to remulch all the time if you have the plant there that you want as your ground cover layer. That 20 bags a year could turn into 2 bags a year. I say take a walk because, you know, in the city of Gulfport, we've had a lot of fun walking around the neighborhood and looking at what everybody else is growing. And as landscapers and landscape designers and, you know, people that have dealt with this for a long time, we spend a lot of time criticizing, but also looking at what people are doing successfully and what's growing well in our area. And when you get to know plants, you can say, okay, that will grow in our area. You know, it's that simple. You know, take a walk around and see what you have, and then start to identify. I mean, I'm obsessed with being able to identify plants. In my spare time, I do read books about. It's literally called Weeds of Florida. It's one of my favorite books. It's a riveting tale. I love it. But I love to be able to identify those things, not only because it helps our business, but because it allows me to really say, okay, is that something that I need to spend time pulling out, or can I step back and really appreciate that for the intrinsic value that it's bringing to the landscape? Like Amanda was saying, you know, these are incredible plants that have, I mean, you look at just, for example, Bidens, you know, it's a tough plant. It's a really tough plant, which is great. It doesn't need any water. It doesn't need any care. It doesn't need anything at all. It'll grow in so many different environments, and that's something to be impressed by, to see how something can work so well. So be realistic. You know, be realistic about what you really want to do. You know, some people will have very large, grand visions. Start small. Start with a little bit less. But if you want to start bigger, you know, I would say definitely getting professional help. You know, having somebody help you to do a design or a consultation could save you potentially years of headaches by just trying to, oh, I planted it, it looked cool, but now my entire yard is that plant. And I renamed my house Pothos Alley because it was a nice house plant and I put it in my house and now it got taken over. So that's why if you do want to do something bigger, I would definitely recommend doing the research or hiring some professional help. You can also start out smaller and still have some help. And then change your expectations, you know, being realistic, like what your expectations should be based in reality. And then stress as an asset is one of my favorite things. If you have a dry, sandy, caked yard, salty, then that's awesome. You have an amazing, unique environment that you can grow plants in that no one else can. Somebody who has a moist, not salty, you know, different area, different zone, you know, use that stress, what could be a challenge as an asset. Can we go to the next slide, Amanda? So I'm just going to try to go over quick, and I don't know if we mentioned in the beginning, but we definitely want to have plenty of time to take everybody's questions. That's always a lot of fun to see what people are really here for and what they want to hear. You know, a lot of these things people here might have already heard, but you know, we'll try to take as many questions as we can. But so your beachy coastal area, you know, we have tons of intracoastal areas. We also have what would have been former sandhill environments, and that would be literally a high area of sand. So if you have a type of yard where you can get a rain like we got on Saturday and the water is gone instantly, these are the types of plants that you could also use as well. But it's going to also flow over into a pine flatwood type of environment. So beachy coastal area, if you are beach, coastal, you got a lot of stuff that's going to like the full sun. There's not a lot of large shade casting trees on a beach or a coastal area. Australian pines do not count, invasive tree. And that's a whole other subject in and of itself. Invasive plants is important to know. You know, well-drained soil, the water goes away right away. That's well-drained. Excessively well-drained is actually what you could call it as well. Low nutrients. These plants do not need any kind of special Miracle-Gro soil. They don't need fertilizer. They don't need worm castings. Like, I think it's great, but you know, a lot of people come in, especially when they're planting a tree. Oh, I bought 20 bags of Miracle-Gro X500 soil. It's amazing, and I put in like 5 pounds of fertilizer and worm castings, and I planted my pine tree. I'm like, why would you do that? You know, you're truly handicapping your tree if you're not planting to the area that's in there. And that's one of the biggest things with trees is you don't need to amend your soil. But if you have a beachy coastal area, plant beach coastal plants.
And yeah, just to clarify, this, what Stefan's going over with these different archetypes isn't what you want, it's what you already have. So look at, you know, what kinds of trees, what kinds of soil you have. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to, and Amanda asked us to go through these different types of ecosystems is because with planting the plants that will be happy in that ecosystem, you'll also attract the types of wildlife that live in those ecosystems as well. So
Exactly.
just make a note of that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. No, thank you, Mallory, for kind of giving that background. Yeah, this is what you already have, and then planting these native plants to this environment are going to be giving back that habitat that was always there. You know, it's so incredible. If you plant it, they will come. It's that simple. You know, if there used to be buttonwoods and cabbage palms and gumbo limbos and pines and all these other flowers and grasses there, and you put them back, those endemic, and you know, when we say endemic, that means it doesn't occur anywhere else in the world. It's endemic to Florida. Those endemic species will return and will have an area that they can actually nest and live and procreate and have your yard as its habitat. So yeah, so these are just some, you know, I won't go through all of these, but beachy coastal type plants. Buttonwood is one of my favorite. You know, you have, of course, all your cabbage palms, which is probably one of the toughest plants around. If you have any issues with exotic palms, you won't have them with cabbage palms. They don't need anything extra. And then a lot of different cool things. Gumbo limbos are super cool. Pines, you know, I say pines, they're not right on the beach, but further back. The pine flatwood area would actually flow over into a beachy coastal type of area. And then, of course, mangroves are incredible. And then a lot of different awesome flowers that you can put in. Dune sunflower is what you see the picture of here. And there's a lot of others. And I would say just take a walk on the beach and see what you can see. All right, so pine flatwoods, Pinellas County is named after pines. Most of the southeast, more than 90% was covered in longleaf pine habitat. We have lost some species to extinction because of all the removal of the longleaf pines. Over 95%, if not more of them, have been developed. But important thing to know about this is it's dominated by pines. You know, plant pines in your tree, in your yard. You know, they're amazing plants, and they attract so many different types of animals. And they attract a diverse understory, like we were talking about. You have a lot of different types of pine flatwoods, ranging from very sandy to a little less well drained. You know, areas staying a little bit more moist. So it's a very large diversity of plants that you can attract, that you can put in that area that will attract a lot of different types of creatures. One of our favorites that we deal with is gopher tortoises. We're lucky enough to be able to work at some properties where there's still enough space for gopher tortoises to live and thrive and breed. And mostly what they eat is grass, actually. Yeah, when you look at something that's fire adapted, It likes to have some open space in between it, you know, sandiness. Your wiregrasses, saw palmetto is amazing, super tough plants. And then in a moister area of the pine flatwoods, that's where you would find your blazing star, coreopsis, and milkweeds. And coreopsis is the state wildflower of Florida. So that's what most of Pinellas was. So if you're anywhere away from the coast, you probably have some type of pine flatwoods type of environment. So look into that to find out what you can put in your yard to attract a lot of different things.
All right, everybody. We have a couple people who are raising their hands, and we really want to take your questions, but we don't have a way to communicate with you if you raise your hand. If you want to type your questions into either the Q&A in the or the chat box, we'll be able to see them. So thank you. All right.
And thanks for the questions, guys. We really want to try to get to everything. And I'm always excited with these things because we always learn something new. You know, we have a passion for this, like Amanda was saying, and this is what we're kind of obsessed with, but there's always something new to learn. So I always try to stay humble with all of this stuff, and I'm sure we can learn some stuff from you guys. So the other type of area I wanted to talk about is kind of what, I don't know if you noticed on the last slide, I did say that pine flatwoods and pine trees are fire adapted. So fire is super important in Florida. Once you start getting involved with the Native Plant Society and native plants in general and the historical habitats that were in Florida, you'll understand the role that fire plays. Some places would have burns every year, 2 years, 3 years. Other places would have burned maybe every 20 or 30 years, but fire was, and still is in a lot of places, an important aspect. When you take that fire away like we have, obviously you don't have you know, healthy fires in Pinellas County anymore because there's no space, it's developed. So what happened is oaks have kind of become the dominant plant, and that oak will turn it into an oak hammock, and an oak hammock is pretty much a slightly raised area of soil. You know, Florida elevation is measured in inches, so it's slightly raised. Oak trees kind of take over and create their own habitat, the oak tree being the dominant plant in Pinellas County. Last time I checked, it's about 70% plus of Pinellas County is actually live laurel oak. So what can you plant if you got a huge oak tree? And oak trees are amazing. Oak trees themselves can support over, last time I checked, 300 different types of insects. A lot of those being fat, juicy, delicious grubs and worms, like Amanda was saying, which are super important for young birds, but also different types of small mammals, our possums, things like that, which I think possums are very cute, actually. We'll eat things like that, and it's important food source for them, but obviously your birds, different things like that. So an oak is a great thing to have. So after you have that oak, you're going to have a little bit more moisture retention in your yard, especially with a live oak, and with all that leaf matter that's dropping. So after a while, it actually will improve the soil and change that soil. So you're going to have more moisture and heavy shade, and that's where different things like what we're seeing, still different types of grasses you can use. Beautyberry, shiny coffee is one of my favorites. Those are your shrubs. A wild petunia, I don't have that on there. We do have a native petunia. And I added native azaleas because I got a native azalea from North Florida because I wanted one. And everyone told me you can't grow it here, but I brought it anyway. And we brought it to our very dry yard, and it was suffering where I put it. Even though I put it in heavy shade, it was not happy with the soil. So what we did was we collected about 20 bags of oak leaves.
From this yard you're seeing on the screen. From
this yard that you're seeing on the screen, which is in South Tampa. And we're like, we're not throwing away this leaf gold. This is amazing. This is coming back to our place. So we just took these huge bags of leaves and we dumped them right on the azalea, and I haven't had to water it since. And that was about 2 weeks ago. So it needed that acidity from the leaves, also the moisture retention. And as that breaks down, that's where all those awesome little critters that Amanda was pointing out, that's where they live, in between. You know, imagine like a 10-inch stack of leaves breaking down over time, that's like the coolest insect playground. It's like a jungle gym times a million, you know. It's just like this intricate web and a buffet. I mean, so it's pretty incredible. So and then I added things like magnolia, sweet gum, red maple, elms, and that's what we're seeing a lot. Our tree canopy. You'll see a lot of those things, along with your live oaks. But yeah, a lot of that has come in because the pines were taken out. But I see people planting pines now in very dry areas. People have spent a lot of time removing laurel oaks. If you've heard of laurel oaks, they do have a very short lifespan. And that's why I say get a good arborist. You want to have a ISA certified arborist at the least, and also being from a reputable company. O'Neill's is great. Utsi is great. I'm sure Amanda knows some up in Dunedin area as well. But having a good arborist to take care of your trees. I mean, live oak, they call it that because it could live for hundreds of years. So, so yeah, we're talking about blueberries in the flatwoods. So the cool thing about blueberries is the variety that you get in the store is actually a cultivar of our natives, of a native blueberry called the high bush blueberry. And the high bush blueberry will grow in this area of Florida up into North Florida. As far as what South Florida, I'm not 100% sure, further south from here, but it will grow in North Florida and in Central Florida. We have some growing out in our Pine Flatwoods scrub area that we are working on. Scrub blueberry is a variety, the high bush blueberry, shiny blueberry. There's a ton of different blueberry species actually. The Vacciniums, anything in the Vaccinium family is going to be a blueberry, so you can definitely grow those. Yeah, and there's tons of blueberry farms here. Yeah, they do grow great in Florida. Yeah, and it shares many plants with flatwoods. So yeah, so that's kind of the oak hammock. And I say scrubby flatwoods. I didn't mention that as much. So scrubby flatwoods is, you'll probably see some oak areas that the oak tree seems a little bit squatter. You're probably looking at a sand live oak, and it's an oak tree that grows in extremely dry areas, but there's no pines there. So that would also be your things like myrtle oaks, scrub oaks, sand live oaks. They're super hardy, tough plants, and they're incredible with the amount of a variety of things that they attract as well. So yeah, I like plants. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's kind of what we wanted to go over, but real quick, what we do, I don't know if we mentioned in the beginning, and I've been talking a mile a minute, so I'll let Mallory explain, because she does most of the design work. We all do everything together, but really what it started with was maintenance, because you need a special wise hand to maintain your landscape, because there was just a lot of people that had these landscapes, and there wasn't as many people doing that type of maintenance. So that's really where it started. But we love butterfly gardens, pollinator plantings, things like that. But Mallory can maybe explain some of the other things we do.
Yeah, we have a nice little handy list here on the screen. So like Stefan had said, we can come out and help you identify some plants if you are going through your yard and maybe you just moved or you haven't had them identified before, if you're not sure where to start or what kind of ecosystem that your yard is. We do help with identification and consultation. We can help educate you about the plants that are in your yard. We do have background in permaculture design as well. But like Stefan said, the majority of what we do is maintenance. So if you maybe only live here part of the year, or you just need some help with keeping the weeds that you don't want in your yard out, like for us, I mean, I think the biggest trouble we have is with the grasses. That's what we do, and we know, for the most part, we're pretty good with what seedlings of plants we want look like. So if you're trying to cultivate something like a meadow or a lush butterfly garden, we can recognize those seedlings, show you them, and and keep them growing in nice and thick throughout the year. So I think that pretty much covers what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you work with Amanda and get a beautiful design done, we can also plant it for you.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely refer most of my installations over to Mallory and Stefan. They do a great job. I do native plant work, and I also do I do edible work as well. I design gardens, food forests, permaculture projects, and native plants, or a combination of all three, kind of put them together. I also do virtual consultations, so if you're not local and you want something simple or you just need some ideas, I do virtual consultations, video consultations. I do garden refresh for North Pinellas County. So if you need someone to come in and weed your garden and replant it with some vegetable seedlings for this appropriate growing season, I can do that for you. Landscape design, and I also develop a DIY plan for people who want to do it themselves. And you can have help with some of it or part of it or whatever, and do a good part of it yourself as well. I also do garden coaching and a lot of gardening classes and compost system design and support. So if you need help with any of that stuff, reach out. And here's our contact information. And while this is up, we're going to take your questions. We had quite a few come in. I'll take this one. Do either of us work in Hillsborough County? Yes. Yes, I will go to Hillsborough County, and
we also do. So yeah, so it's a yes for us too.
All right. So in the Q&A here, we have. I had a black swallowtail caterpillar last week on my parsley plant. I brought the plant inside on my lanai with the caterpillar, but it disappeared after 4 days. I can't find it anywhere. Well, Mallory, do you want to take this one?
My best guess is it crawled up around somewhere private to cocoon, because they'll go into hidden places to cocoon. What do you think?
Yeah, we found butterflies cocooning and larvaing and all that in all kinds of strange places. For some reason on the undersides of doors, railings, on other plants, it's hiding.
I found one time on a garden statue on the nose of a mermaid hanging off. It could have also left though because it didn't have enough food. Butterflies often and caterpillars often don't like to be taken indoors. That might be something they didn't like. Are there ways to get water to the butterflies without encouraging mosquitoes to breed?
I've read that you should refresh your butterfly waters, every other day or so, just, filling it up with the hose and letting that old water come out. I think there's some kind of tablets that you can use as well, but I don't know if they're safe for butterflies.
Well, I've seen also people will fill up like a very shallow dish with sand. And so it's kind of just like wet sand. It's not standing water. Because mosquitoes do need standing water to breed, only a tiny amount. So if you have your dish low enough so that it will spill over and you put enough sand in it, ostensibly you wouldn't have enough room for a mosquito to actually breed in it, because they do need standing water for their little larvae to kind of hang out.
The puddlers, the little trays that you make the butterfly watering dish out of, those are usually pretty shallow anyway, and water evaporates pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was so hot today, our bird bath was almost empty.
It was very hot today.
Just like one day of sun.
Yeah.
What are some things I can do to attract bats? They don't seem to be around my current neighborhood of Harshock Lake.
Amanda, you had a picture of bats. What do you think?
So my neighborhood is actually full of bats, and they're different species of bats, like different nesting spaces. There's a really big bat house at a park near my house. near Moccasin Lake Nature Preserve in Clearwater, and it's really tall and it has this big like it's a big tower, and inside there's all these little slats. They like to sleep or nest in these kind of like tight, cozy spaces. And one thing that they like is those palm trees with the skirts. You know, the like a cabbage palm, a native palm, and then it has the green fronds on top. Then it has the fronds on the bottom. Well, people usually remove those. Tree services usually remove those, but in nature that has a purpose. So when we take our plants that we're supposed to that we're nurturing and we over manicure them, what we're doing is we're depriving the natural systems of their ability to support that ecosystem. So those fronds will naturally kind of prune off, fall off as the tree grows. And I understand that is unsightly, but that's one thing that you can do to attract bats. You can also get a bat house, but you need to look into making sure that you hang it up at the right height, because I know that is something that is kind of particular for different species of bats.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. There's also a really cool website called TampaBayBats.net. And I forgot where it was. We had seen them, but it was a festival somewhere, and there's people that do spend their time. If you find a bat on the ground, call them, and they can help you out to rehabilitate them. They do get attacked by different things sometimes, or might fall out because a tree was prematurely pruned. They love that cabbage palm. Like Amanda was saying, the fronds stacked on one another make a great habitat. And if you look at, I mean, in my opinion, a cabbage palm that's left naturally booted, you know, with those pieces attached to the trunk and also the older fronds, which do not ever need to be removed, is much more beautiful than the over-pruned, extremely over-pruned trees that you'll see a lot of times where it's a tiny little tuft. And one of the biggest no-nos is you never, ever prune green fronds. Palms can be very sensitive to that. They need every frond to be able to produce food for themselves through photosynthesis. And if you're cutting off those green fronds, you're putting your palm trees at risk, exotic and native, especially your native. So I think that's great advice, is let things be a little more natural.
Okay, so neem oil. My goal is to grow a food forest that is welcoming to natural animals, but some of my veggies are getting wrecked. How harmful is neem oil to birds, bugs, ladybugs? So neem oil doesn't discriminate between what it kills. I guess you could say you want to apply it at night if you're going to use any of those products, because insects are usually less active as far as like predatory insects go, and bees and birds. So that way it'll have time to dry. But if you're trying to attract ladybugs or that natural ecosystem, you might want to consider not using neem oil. One just really simple thing that you can do if you want to get rid of the bugs is you can hit them with the hose. You can blast them with a stream of water. It'll blast them off the plant, and then, yeah, they'll probably get back on the plant, but it gives the plant some relief. One of my favorite ways to tackle that problem is to use what I call trap plants, where I'll take my favorite to use is cowpeas or black-eyed peas, and I'll plant them in poor soil. They'll grow really well, but they won't be as healthy as the plants that I planted in my garden soil. So that's why I say plant them in poor soil. They're really pretty plants. So you can put them just, you know, somewhere where you can see them even, it's fine. But they attract aphids like crazy. And why do you want aphids? You want ladybugs. Aphids are ladybugs' favorite food. Ladybugs and other predatory insects eat other bugs too, but aphids will come in droves to those cowpeas or black-eyed peas. And then you'll have your predatory population start to take up residency in your yard.
And I also see someone mention that bats also nest in Spanish moss. Spanish moss is great. Spanish moss will also be a really good habitat in and of itself. They attract a lot of good things, and it's not bad for your tree. You don't need it ever removed from your tree. Just a quick note on that, the bats.
Another question about bird houses. Are there any particular birds and Pinellas that would benefit from a bird house? What shapes or sizes? I want to make one with my grandkids, but I want to make one that will be useful and not just decorative.
That one, I believe you have to, I think from what I've read, the birds are specific about the size of the hole and the size of the, I guess, interior of the birdhouse. So I would look up specific birds that you want to attract to it and build it to those specifications.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's so many different birds in this area. Most of them are migratory in one way or the other, but I mean, mockingbirds and blue jays and cardinals, things like that, don't necessarily need any kind of birdhouse. You know, they do pretty well on their own, but something more specific. I know people love owl boxes, specific to that size, but like Mallory was saying, if it's something that's a small enough hole for a certain type of bird, they'll feel much safer to go in there because predators won't be able to get in as readily.
Would you recommend adding food plants like kale or tomatoes and such with milkweed or tropical sage?
Yeah, we love mixing our native plants and flowers and veggies. It's beautiful and it helps everything stay healthy.
That's awesome. I love doing that. I mean, Mallory was kind of the one who kind of said, oh, let's, you know, it doesn't just have to be a wildflower garden. Why not we put some, you know, beautiful ornamental and edible kale in there and a tomato and a broccoli, and then around it have, tropical sage. I mean, if you know what tropical sage is, it seeds like crazy. But it can be grown in more nutrient-rich soils that veggie plants would like. I think it's up to your aesthetic, but if it shares a similar type of cultural requirements as far as light and moisture and nutrient content in the soil, go for it. I think that's awesome. I love that mix.
Another benefit that you'll see with mixing vegetable plants and flowering plants or different types of vegetable plants together is you'll have diversity in your plants. And when insects, like pest insects, are looking for food, they're going to look for a lot of their food. When you're wanting to plant a butterfly garden or something, it's often recommended to plant several of the same plants together so the butterflies can see them more easily. But it's the same for pest insects. So when you have a whole, you know, big garden full of tomatoes and only tomatoes, the tomato pest insects are like, oh, look at all those tomatoes. This is a giant buffet. But if you have a tomato plant and like 6 other plants together, they're like, is that a tomato? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll keep looking for something else. So your plants will be probably a little bit more pest resilient in that diverse planted environment.
Absolutely.
I see Erin's question about the little green parrots that we have here. They're not native, but I've noticed that they really love eating in our yard the Barbados cherries as well as sunflower seeds. If you grow a big sunflower, they'll come, but they usually come all in one day and eat all of it. So all the cherries or all the sunflowers.
Sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
I have a problem with wasps eating caterpillars. I can't find the wasp nest, but they keep returning often. What can I do to deter them?
You know, wasps are pretty much all parasites, which is really cool. If you read more about wasps, they all parasitize something else, and there's actually a bunch of wasps that eat other wasps, but also birds and different types of mammals, birds, and different types of insects will eat them. So having a nice diversity of things, and maybe like Amanda was saying, you know, maybe move your butterfly attracting plants in different areas throughout your yard and see where it works. But wasps are just kind of part of the food chain. Not all your caterpillars, unfortunately, can or should survive. You know, really having the fittest of them survive is going to be helpful for the species longevity in the long run anyway.
This may not be a popular answer, but there's a lot of controversy around folks who are bringing in mass amounts of butterflies into their home and raising butterflies indoors. There's some research and some professionals who feel that is causing butterflies and caterpillars who wouldn't have ordinarily survived in the wild because they weren't healthy enough to flourish and then go out and procreate, and causing some problems in the gene pool, I guess you could say. It's encouraging some of those health problems to exist longer than they would have if they would have been taken care of naturally. So.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And going back a couple questions ago, we had Aaron and Ron talk about pipevines. So that's something that I've heard a couple different opinions on. You know, we have a couple native pipevine varieties that we have planted. They're just not very showy. But what we do have available is the Dutchman's pipe. That's probably what you're used to seeing. It's the one with the gigantic hanging flower. It's 6 inches wide, 6 inches long, very unique looking flower, and that will attract the Polydamas swallowtail. I have not seen any other varieties of swallowtail use it. Pipevines, pipevine swallowtails use it. The Polydamas swallowtail will use it, not the pipevine that I've seen. So if you want the pipevine swallowtail, there is another Aristolochia species. That's the name of the pipevine. Yeah, she says you got the Dutchman's pipe. That's Aristolochia gigantea because it has a gigantic flower. But Aristolochia species, if you look those up, Aristolcha, Aristolochia, is going to be, there's different varieties that are available actually at a couple native nurseries if you want to try to attract different types. So that was the pipevine question. And yeah, I do notice just one more from the green palms. Bernadette said, you know, leave the green fronds on the tree, don't cut its leaves off. Is it the same with the seed pods? So while the seed pod is flowering, especially with the cabbage palm that I've seen, but also with some of the other exotic palms as well, you know, queen palm and things like that, you'll see just a massive amount of pollinators on them. They just come and it's just a show. It's so cool, especially if your cabbage palm is maybe still smaller and you can see it. We have one in our yard, luckily, and it's about eye level, and the bumblebees absolutely love it. So I would say that's enough reason to leave it on.
With the berries as well.
Exactly, and the berries are going to attract, like Aaron was saying, you know, the exotic green parrots, which isn't what I would particularly want to attract to a yard, but they're still cool. And then different types of birds are definitely going to use those seeds.
We actually had someone tell us they were analyzing coyote scat in Boyd Hill Nature Preserve, and that one of the most common things they found the coyotes were eating was the queen palm fruit. So all kinds of things eat that stuff, I guess.
Yep.
I had a dog that used to eat the queen palm fruit. Freaked me right out. I took him to the vet's office. What is this? And that's because I'm from Michigan. We have another question. Melon worms have taken over so many cucumbers, pumpkins, and killed their plants. Any suggestions? Well, that is a fact of life, and one of the reasons why I don't grow those things every year. You can look at the underside of your leaves and try to catch them when they're small. And you can also use a product called BT. It is OMRI listed. You'll have to dilute it with water. It's a bacteria that kills caterpillars and nothing else. You have to be very careful that you don't put it on anything that you want caterpillars on, like a butterfly larval host plant. But those caterpillars are they're pretty voracious, and they will bore into the stems as well. So just visually checking for the little caterpillars is important.
And the wasps, have the wasps come and eat them.
Yeah, wasps will eat them, and the birds. It's really cool actually. At Wilcox, we have a fence that runs up along the edge of the property, and we had 3 huge southern red cedars that we planted there actually about 3 years ago. They're not so gigantic, but they're filled with small birds. And I decided to, I didn't actually tell my boss until it was covering the fence, but I grew some Seminole pumpkin, which if you've ever grown Seminole pumpkin, it's a huge vine. And I think I still have like 10 pumpkins and like another 20 I'm trying to give away, but a ton of fruit from it. So first of all, varieties that are good for your area. That goes right back to the right plant, right place, healthy plant. Don't try to plant something that's not going to do well here, that you already know is going to fail here. If it's adapted to northern Michigan, then you can talk to Amanda about real estate opportunities in northern Michigan and grow something up there, you know. But now that you're here in steamy, crazy Florida, you have to kind of just change your expectations a little bit about what can grow, and also the season. Amanda mentioned that as well. Seasonality of things is super important.
I was just going to say 2 of the seed companies that we really found success with are Southern Adapted Seeds. So there's Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and So True Seed, neither of which are in Florida, but there's still more varieties that are more well adapted to the heat.
Good luck with Southern Exposure. The point of the Southern Red Cedars next to the Seminole pumpkin vine on the fence was that the Southern Red Cedar was great habitat for the birds, and I witnessed it with my own eyes, that the bird would hop out on the fence where the vine was growing and spent 5-10 minutes picking every single, hand picking for me, of course, every single green caterpillar and worm that was on that Seminole pumpkin, just picked it clean, because that's what they want. They loved it. But if the birds can't get to it, there's no access to it,
No habitat for them.
or no habitat for them, then they're just going to devour your plants. But cucumbers can be tough. I wouldn't try again until it gets cooler.
So we have a comment here. I'm from Michigan. Welcome to the hot, sticky South, Gail. And I've always tried to have a beautiful flower garden like my mom. My Florida native husband said to give it up. Well, you can have a beautiful garden. You're just going to need to have different plants.
Exactly.
It'll look different, but you can.
Actually, I do know someone that grows dahlias here. I think there's a Southern Adapted Dahlia.
Yeah. Get to the native nurseries. There's flowers everywhere. Don't forget that Florida is Spanish for the land of flowers. Flores. This is named after flowers. We got more flowers than anybody. So you just got to go check out your parks, check out Amanda's yard, go to the native nurseries. You can absolutely grow things here.
Stokes, aster.
Yeah, there's so many cool ones. Also, Erin's asking about what you can plant to attract cardinals. She has lots of mockingbirds and blue jays. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I've seen all 3 together. I definitely see cardinals less. I do notice them in areas with a little bit more mature tree canopy, large pine trees, large oaks especially. But you know, that's a great question. I'm not 100% sure. If you've got the others, then keep doing what you're doing. Maybe plant some pine trees. Yes, you have to give up having a Michigan yard. It's not going to happen. Change your expectations.
I also want to mention, just while we have a second, we just got this book, Bringing Nature Home, which I've heard is the best, especially from Amanda. So
I haven't read it. I've read parts.
Yet, but we're going to how you can sustain wildlife with native plants. So it's all about what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, I'm very excited to read that one now.
The author of that book is Doug Tallamy, and he did a free webinar a few weeks ago that I sat through and took very detailed notes. I was a little starstruck the whole time. He's one of my inspirations, I guess. And anyway, the webinar was recorded, and I will include a link to that in our recording of this this webinar, so you can have an opportunity to look at that if you want to.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of great authors out there. Craig Ugle, local, all about native plants. He has some great books. And there's a guy also named Walter Kingsley Taylor, who wrote some amazing wildflower identification books. Is a really good one as well. Aaron said, yeah, Willow Tree Nursery is great for exotics, is not good for native plants, but they are still a very awesome nursery. They have great veggie plants there as well, as far as I know. And so there's a lot of really cool. Visit local, check out your local nurseries for sure. This area used to be covered with actually a bunch of different nurseries back in the day, but yeah, there's not that many left. So definitely support local for sure.
One thing I'd like to point out, if you're trying to maybe go on a native plant walk or go to a local park and you're using one of those phone apps like Picture This, they don't really do a good job of identifying Florida native plants. So you could always take pictures and send them to one of us, or you can post them on the Florida Native Plant Society or Florida Native Plant Facebook page, and someone will ID them for you there.
William said black oil sunflower seeds will attract all the cardinals you want. I personally think bird feeders are cool. I think they're an interesting way to get birds to come to the yard. But for me, planting native plants and planting their food source that's growing here naturally is the way to go. I think it's a cool way to feed things in Interim. And I know people that have both, that have native plants and still the bird feeders. But we don't have any bird feeders in our yard, and we have so many birds in the area. But we do have a lot of also fruit trees as well to maybe supplement. So that's, I think we have one called, Barbados cherry is great. And there's enough cherries for us and the birds. But that's cool. If you want to see some sooner, try the black oil sunflower seeds, but maybe put a bird feeder up and plant some native shrubs around it. What if you can't go to the store and buy black oil sunflower seeds? Your cardinals are going to be looking at you pretty pissed, like, hey man, what happened to those black oil sunflower seeds? I got used to it, So maybe having a little bit of both as well. But I think that's cool advice either way, and just people enjoying. So Aaron said squirrels wreck her bird feeders. I gave up and just plant. Okay, I didn't think about that. Amanda, have you had problems with squirrels?
Yeah. I have a 4-year-old, and he does like a bird feeder. So I don't have one out all the time, but every once in a while we'll buy a bag of bird seed and we'll put up a feeder, and eventually a few birds will go to it. But for the most part, the squirrels get in it and they dump it out somehow, no matter how squirrel proof it is. I do all the things, all the gizmos, and I don't know. I guess I feed the squirrels. But very few birds come to it. But I do see a lot of birds in my yard. I have at least 3 different species that nest in my trees, and it's not uncommon to see 4 or 5 different types of birds all at the same time while I'm just sitting there having my coffee in the morning. It's really nice. And, I don't know how my mother feels about this, but my yard is too loud in the morning with the birds to call my mom on the phone. It's just I can't hear the phone. They're too noisy. In a good way. They're singing. They're songbirds, but you can have beautiful
also,
wildlife in the city.
Yeah, for those of you just starting out, don't get discouraged, because we've been at our place 3 years, but also built on the foundation that the former owners started, which was a lot of native plants and fruit trees. And I think, Amanda, you've been at your place.
I've been at my place for 8 years, and when I moved in, there were 3 large laurel oak trees. So that was also to our advantage, and their neighborhood is just full of large mature trees. It's an older neighborhood, but I've added the native plants. It looks much fuller now. And I always had a few blue jays or a mockingbird here and there, but now I'm seeing birds I have to look up. I'm like, I've never seen that one before. I have to look it up and see what kind it is. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so just start somewhere if you're brand new, and also, if you notice that there isn't a lot of habitat in your neighborhood, you could be that kind of island for things passing through. So it's great to either way, if you have, you know, a neighborhood full of mature trees, or if you're the first one kind of getting it started, that's a great stopping point for a bird or a butterfly on its way somewhere else too.
That's a great takeaway.
Mhm.
I really like that the whole idea of this is that your yard can potentially be the surviving link that a creature needs to carry on, because there's nothing else for it to eat, because it's surrounded by a sea of chemicals and overlawned yards. You know, lawn is not bad, but it's not attracting anything. There's no habitat in a manicured lawn at all. So you really could be that creature's last chance at actually survival, because it has somewhere to actually get some food and cover and shelter and all those things. So.
In Doug Tallamy's book, he says that over 80% of the land east of the Mississippi River is privately owned. And when you're considering conservation, if you don't consider privately owned land as a big part of conservation efforts to restore wildlife and habitat, you're missing out on the big piece of the pie, not only percentage-wise, but also control-wise. You likely have control over what plants you put in your yard. But when you're considering public spaces, parks, and street sides and whatnot, there's a lot of red tape to make any changes, budget issues. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. Those changes happen a lot more slowly. And a lot of those areas are also being taken over by invasives, or being sprayed with chemicals to remove the invasives, which is removing the habitat, even if it's temporarily, for those species. So they may be relying upon the
Looks like we lost some audio from Amanda. Can you guys still hear us? Amanda,
I think
we
I'm back.
Yep, you're back.
Okay. Cool.
Sorry about that. I had said this wonderful inspirational thing too.
I saw it in your eyes. We saw the fire in your eyes. I was like, oh my God, we're missing it.
Yeah, I was talking about Doug Tallamy. I don't know where I left off. Did you hear me talk about that?
We heard that part, and 80% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So thinking about your own private space, there's a lot of red tape involved with making public space.
Oh, you guys heard the message.
Yeah.
That was the important part. So yeah, just look at some natives. They're really cool.
Absolutely.
And I think most, if there are people on here that aren't, owners of a property, there's so many community gardens in Pinellas County, and I'm sure most of them would be delighted to have a bed dedicated to native plants, or a hedge that was native flowering shrubs that would bring more butterflies and birds to the community garden. So whatever space you got.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we did actually at a community garden plot for the Florida Native Plant Society Pinellas chapter. We took this plot that no one was using, and we put a bunch of native plants in it. And it was a beautiful little space. So we put some signs there. So if you want to grow flowers and you don't feel like growing tomatoes or whatever, you can go to those spaces and say, hey, I'm helping out your tomato plants because I'm attracting all the beneficial insects that are going to help the pests from taking it over. So I think that's a great idea as well.
All right, we have one last question here. The book about Florida weeds, what was that title?
Yeah, she's going to go get it. And there was also somebody who was asking about Marimekophytes, which was something I had never heard of before, but it's pretty much a type of plant from South America. There's ants that live in it. It has, South American plants are great in South America. Don't ever introduce something into an ecosystem that you don't know about full well. We do have native acacias as well, though. There are acacia plants native to Florida. Sweet acacia and cinecord are two great ones that grow in this area. And we have plenty of ants already. We don't need any more. Fire ants are invasive, if you guys don't know that. So we don't need any more exotic South American ants. We have plenty as already. And we do have some native acacias. So that was, somebody had asked that question a little while ago. Oh, here's the, yeah, it's from the University of Florida. It's an awesome book. So it's interesting. It was actually, it's called Weeds in Southern Turfgrass. So it was actually written specifically for people trying to take care of their turf. It was, I want to say it was written sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. So, you know, but there's some really good things in there about identifying grasses. And the funny thing is I'm looking at it, oh, you know, we actually sell a couple of those plants now at the nursery. So I think so many of these things have actually been completely wiped out, and there's not these native areas with things like, for example, in this book is blanket flower and violet and all these beautiful plants that people had seen for weeds for so long, and now, oh, where are they? Their environment is gone, their habitat is gone. So people are going into stuff like this and saying, okay, what was once a weed, essentially a plant you don't want, is now something I would really love to see because it's a beautiful flower and it's beneficial and it's sense of place. It's Florida. So, but yeah, it's called Weeds of Southern Turf Grasses, and it's a University of Florida book. And I love it. It's really good. It's a really good book.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was great. And if you have any questions or you'd like to contact us for our services, we'd be really happy to help you out. And this webinar was recorded, and we will go ahead and send a recording out to everybody that registered, and a couple of resources as well that we talked about if you're curious about book titles or other sources for information.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun. And thank you, Amanda, for putting us on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you for all the questions.